Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 21st, 2022 Worcester Township Board of Supervisors work session. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Rick DiLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who's our third member. We also have several members from our planning commission that are here for our work session as well, that are in this front table here. We have Lee, Michelle, Tony, Jen, and Bob. What's your name again? Bob. I'm just having fun with Bob. On the side table over here, we have Brian, who's our county planner and assistant from the Montgomery County Planning Commission. We have Blake Dunbar, who is from our solicitor's office, and we have Paul Leonard, who is our interim township manager. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board? Thank you, Blake. And also, I would like to just note that tonight's meeting is being recorded. First item on our agenda is public comment. Ultimately, we obviously don't have a lot of space up here, but if somebody does have public comment, Tony, I'll ask you just kind of slide if they need to come up for that. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening? Jim. You may. Yep, that's fine.
You don't want to sit over here with me?
Can you hear that?
Yes,
Good.
sir.
Jim Mollick, Worcester. I attended one of these, I guess the comprehensive plan people met on a regular basis. And I attended one of these meetings by Zoom back when Andrew Raquette was around. So that gives you some idea how long ago it was. That was like mid-COVID. So I'm thinking it's at least a year, maybe a year and a half ago. And I was struck because I thought the comprehensive plan was supposed to be about, I guess, the guidelines the township wants to follow for development in the future of the township. And I'm sitting there listening to the meeting, and one of the members on this task force made the comment about expediting the process and whatever documentation there was because of the Palmer property. And Tony, I think you were there. I remember saying something to you guys or to the committee or the group, like, guys, if the Palmers ever find out that you're working this comprehensive plan to the detriment of the Palmers, you guys are going to have a problem. So I don't know whether you guys ever heard that or Andrew told you guys, but it certainly concerned me because I thought that, I read the comp plan myself. There's nothing in there that really should be singling out township residents, people who want to do things with their property. It should be more compliance with the law because this gentleman I guess is from Monco Planning, right? I mean,
Yep.
I listened to him present. There was no, we got to watch out for these people, those people, do this, do that. It was all, hey, this is what the law is. This is where you should go. So, I'm anxious to see the final product. Is it back here for us to take a look at?
So it's online. I don't know that we have copies of the whole document here. This is a discussion about it between us and the Planning Commission, but the draft is online.
The latest version is August 2022, and it is on the township website.
Township, okay.
And just to clarify, Jim, I know it's your public comment. Tonight we're not voting to adopt it. I mean, tonight is a joint session just in terms of that. So certainly there's an opportunity for folks to read it and review it.
Gotcha, because I really hadn't heard anything about it for a while, and when I saw it
Yep.
on the, I figured I'd give you that little piece of info. All right,
Appreciate
guys?
that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board? Okay, so seeing none, we will move on. So the way I thought we might do this, and I just sort of mentioned to Brian, is Brian will take a couple minutes to sort of give the 100-foot view of sort of what this process has been like, as it's, Jim, to your point, it went through the comprehensive plan task force for, I think it was close to 2 years, and then it was transitioned to the planning commission, who maybe February of this year, earlier this year, so several months has been with the planning commission. So it certainly has moved a little, and Brian, I've asked to just sort of give a little overview of sort of where it started, what took place, where we're at, and then we'll have some dialogue between the board and the planning commission on the document as well.
Great, thank you. So, yes, we started at around July 2020. That was our first meeting with the task force. And so my role as a part of this planning process is, as a professional planner, I sort of shepherded the process through and tried to gain consensus where there was consensus, and tried to represent the balance when that was when consensus was unavailable. Because frequently in planning, it's a balancing of priorities, right? And a community is very complex in the planning phases of development. So our job is to create a vision that's informed by numerous previous planning documents, the public survey that was performed, the public meetings that we had on the subjects, and to sort of get to, and while also balancing, all of the best practices around planning, is to create a document that encapsulates all those features. And so yes, so we started in 2020, and we audited the existing 2008 plan, made sure that we were encompassing updates factually and otherwise, and that took the majority of 2020 and into 2021, as you can see up here. Again, we performed a survey, which over 800 responses, I believe, were received as a part of that, or between, I think it was actually, we fully received some sort of response from almost 800 people, so through that process, we also had a public open house in February of 2021. And then we had a second public open house in October of 2021. The first one was virtual. The second one was in person in this room. And throughout that process, we were inviting people to express their views about goals and priorities going forward in the township for the first meeting. And then the second meeting, we talked about how, what were some priorities of the recommendations that we were drafting as a part of this plan, because the plan involves goals and then ways to implement goals, which we call recommendations. So there are policy ideas and programs, which can involve rules and regulations, changes in how things are done, both in the township as well as what other external factors can impact in the township, how we can manage change in the community. And so the drafting process with the task force was an iterative, collaborative process. We wrapped up the task force part of this plan around the end of 2021, and we began in the Planning Commission around February, March of 2022. And so we are approaching the final pieces of that, and then the next step in a planning process is to introduce it to the governing body, the Board of Supervisors, who would be in charge of adopting the plan should they choose to. So that's the general planning process overall.
Sure. So I'm going to ask a couple of premeditated questions so you can maybe so let's start with what a comprehensive plan is and isn't. There's a major distinction between sort of a comprehensive plan and a zoning ordinance, and I think sometimes the two sort of get intermingled. So maybe you could just put a little where the barriers are and kind of where this document might sit in the hierarchy for a municipality.
Sure. So the comprehensive plan is an adopted policy document that acts as a guide for future planning efforts, as well as physical projects that the township will embark upon. And so basically, as you can see up here, the Worcester Comprehensive Plan influences many different aspects, including ordinances such as the zoning and saldo. It influences staff policies and procedures, the capital improvement program, what gets built by the township and for how long the time horizon is. So basically, the comprehensive plan is the vision by which all of these other aspects are influenced. So to answer your question, a zoning ordinance is amended from time to time because it's getting some sort of guidance from the plan. So throughout this document, we talk about possible changes to a zoning ordinance, and but the actual meat of what the actual wording is figured out later. So we sort of we identify that it's, for instance, a priority to improve some section of the zoning ordinance, and then you go ahead and do that later. So we don't actually write the zoning at this time.
Right. So, and in terms of other documents, so historically, we had an open space plan document, which I think was around 2005 or 6 that was drafted. This 2022 comprehensive plan was based at least initially on the 2008 plan, which I think was based on the 1996 plan. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the continuity then? There's always the concern, do the documents get dated? We started this process, really 3 years ago. How do you sort of factor that in terms of carrying the vision forward that got started by previous iterations, and how you might deviate from that and what might?
Sure. So, we take into account the relevance of a plan. I think the Worcester Community Greenways plan was from 2004 or 5. Yep. And many of those components were still relevant today in terms of potential trail routes, as a for instance. So, we double-checked the items that are still relevant and incorporated them sort of into the plan because it represents, as you said, a continuity of thought and planning that goes on. And between the last comprehensive plan and today, there have been a couple other iterations of different plans that have happened. And so we make sure that this plan is consistent with the spirit of those plans as well, such as the Act 209 Transportation Improvement Program.
And how about the Montgomery County 2040 plan? Did that have any influence in terms of, or did you sort of keep that sort of separate from what we were doing?
It's only really indirectly. Like, it's important that county planning and township planning sort of align, but we didn't really. There were we looked to the comprehensive plan of the county for very light guidance, because as you get further up in scale from a county and then larger geographies, the planning gets less and less specific. So it's actually very easy to still be in line with county planning, regional planning. And so, and the county comprehensive plan largely, indicates, Worcester as, a rural resource area ultimately, which we feel is encompassed within this plan.
So, and I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question, but certainly over the last year or two, this board has put forth initiatives on open space. We've created a codified an open space program within the township. We've done an open space acquisition fairly recently and have also mapped out some other goals in terms of that. One of the topics that had been sort of talked about in this board loosely is the notion of an official map. As you start building out all these documents, you're sort of building those pieces out. And again, to be clear, there's been no formal action taken on that. That's just one of the pieces. Maybe you could offer a point or two about sort of what that might do to the whole umbrella of documentation that we're pulling together here.
Sure. So an official map is actually a piece of regulation that is available to municipalities in Pennsylvania. It essentially generally acts in tandem with the capital improvements plan as well as other long-term plans of the municipality. And what can happen is that an official map will indicate potential road improvements, potential trails, even potential future park and open space. And that can be, used to sort of indicate that, this is a part of the long-term planning for the municipality. Some municipalities use it as basically a discussion tool with property owners when a development comes up, and they see on the official map that an intersection improvement is identified for his parcel, and so basically it starts the conversation early in order to to allow that development to happen, but to actually incorporate the future improvement as a part of a development. Now, the municipality can seek to build that improvement itself, or it can negotiate with the property owner to contribute in some way to that improvement.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, you've got sort of a mix of, with zoning, you have sort of legal elements.
Yes.
With an official map, you have some regulatory elements, but ultimately, above that, the comprehensive plan is intended at its best to sort of be a guiding light, for those elements. But perhaps to Jim's point earlier, ultimately, the comprehensive plan is not that regulatory document or that sort of legal document. Right. It's more of just a guiding light to all the other. You want to be in sync with those things, but ultimately that document isn't serving a purpose that is going to show up in a challenge somewhere that's necessarily. And again, I'm not asking you to make a...
No, that's correct. The plan itself is not a regulation in and of itself. And actually, there's a clause within the municipality's planning code, which is the state statute that determines how municipalities can plan for development. There's actually a clause that says that a municipality cannot be held liable for not implementing a comprehensive plan or a piece of a comprehensive plan, as a for instance. So there's actually some sort of protection for municipalities in that regard.
Okay. Do either of you have any specific questions for Brian? I think you kind of gave us a good layout there, but I then wanted to kind of chat with the planning commission a little, or did you have some questions?
Yeah, Brian, one question. I hear from our neighboring townships about the county and state housing mandates that are being pushed upon the local townships. Did you consider that in your conversations in this plan?
To my knowledge,
Did you inform the committee about what the county and state is pushing on local townships?
in terms of housing specifically,
What they're going to require the local townships to do?
we discussed best practices in regard to planning, and we also discussed some of the legal frameworks for when certain zoning can be challenged. The idea of fair share of housing types is a state law and is incorporated within the municipality's planning code. But we talked about how in certain policy changes that the township can implement, that if they went one way versus another way, then those policies could be less defensible. So we talked a lot about the idea of fair share housing, that by law, all townships need to incorporate a wide variety of housing and housing types. And so there's no, the county itself does not have any mandates regarding housing or anything in that nature. We simply advise the municipalities on those aspects of state law that apply to planning and development.
Excuse me. I guess in the conversation I've had with local municipalities, it's my takeaway from the conversation is that it's not like a target where you're discussing is like a round circle where you have the different levels.
Yes.
It was told to me that the bullseye right there, right in the center, and that's the county and state are mandating these local townships have to get on board with some of these programs. I mean, Convention's talking about it quite a bit right now. That is coming down from the state and county. You're not aware of that?
I mean, there are certainly not in housing, I can say. There are many statewide programs that offer requirements in regard to planning and development, like stormwater. We, again, advise municipalities on what those can be. We don't have a role in enforcing those types of standards. If I can talk to specific ones, if you have any in mind, but ultimately, the Act 167 is the requirement for stormwater planning, essentially, at the MS4 program. Those are not our programs; those are the state programs, and you know, we offer many different guiding documents on trying to implement those programs. But I can't say any specific requirements that we impose on, specifically we impose on municipalities.
We, the county, but you
That's right.
said in there that the state's involved there.
Oh, the state has innumerable requirements on any number of other topics, stormwater, what I mentioned about fair share housing. That's not really, the state doesn't go out and enforce that. That's really just a law that then informs court cases where someone challenges a community about how little or how much housing they permit.
We're well aware of the stormwater requirements from our engineer based on the programs we're involved in. But once again, I'll go back, as you said, it's not the county, but the state is requiring
Right.
these mandates. Was that discussed, the state's mandates requirements for the fair house, maybe it's not fair housing, but the housing requirements that these local municipalities are going to be required to have?
Are going to be required. Apart from the case law that's discussed about fair share, we didn't talk about any potential laws that might be on the books or could be on the books for the future, if that's what you're asking.
So Tony, it came to you earlier this year. Maybe you could give us a couple minutes of your general thoughts on the document, open questions. I know you guys have a planning commission meeting tomorrow night, so if there may be some open questions where you're looking for our input, and then if there are some specific challenges that you guys have run into where we can maybe offer some insight and direction.
Sure, and we'd like to thank you for having us here tonight to be able to discuss this with you. And I could tell you that, from the time that we first started talking about updating our comprehensive plan, which is required by state law, the supervisors put together a committee of, I believe it was 17 people, township residents. It was a very good cross-section of township residents in terms of where people lived, how long they've been in the township, what their knowledge is, and frankly, what their objectives are. And I think we got a good cross-section. And I would like to emphasize that, these people who made up that committee, we met innumerable amount of times. And I will tell you that Brian was very knowledgeable and very professional in the manner in which he conducted himself and which we went through this process. I will tell you that the document looks a lot different than the document that we started out with.
Right.
And there was a great amount of input. And then that plan in that form came to the Planning Commission, and likewise, the Planning Commission has now dealt with this plan in a number of meetings. And, myself and I believe Lee, we're pretty much at every one of these meetings, so we've lived with this.
You're ready to give it back.
We are so ready to give it back. But the point that I'd really like to emphasize is that a comprehensive plan is a guiding document.
Yep.
It's supposed to be what we believe the community wants. And that goes into place. And then it's up to the supervisors to do with it what they want. There's no requirement that the supervisors have to do anything with that. But, and one of our goals and one of the things that we talked about from the beginning is we want to strengthen our ordinances. And the manner in which you strengthen your ordinances through state law is to have a comprehensive plan and to follow that comprehensive plan in your legislation, in what you do. You're not forced to do that, but we, I think, as a community, want to avoid what has happened in the past, and that is development by litigation.
Yep.
And in avoiding that, and I also want to emphasize, and then I'll go through one other thing and be done. The comprehensive plan is just not about land use. Land use is only one aspect of it. This
Right.
covers everything, thus the term comprehensive. But we want to present this document to the supervisors, hear what you have to say about it so that we can incorporate that. Our plan is at our meeting tomorrow night that we have some final touches that we want to make to it, some final questions.
Yep.
But we plan on voting to whether or not we recommend that to the supervisors tomorrow night so that it
Right.
will be in your hands.
Okay, that's fair.
So I want to say that what the comprehensive plan has is it has objectives. That's what we think should happen. And it has recommendations. And the recommendations are essentially tools that we've come together to talk about, both the professional and the people in the township that, we've gotten input from, including the 800 people who answered the survey. And the recommendations are the tools, and this is my take on it, are the tools that you can use if you choose to make these things happen.
Right. Okay.
And so the last thing is the comprehensive plan is broken up into chapters. And each one of these chapters, and I'll go over them very quickly.
1 second. Brian, any chance we have a slide that sort of lists what the chapters are? Is that possible? If you do. Just for a visual if they have it, but go ahead, Tony.
No problem.
I don't have a single one, but I can
Quickly go
That's
through.
fine.
yeah, I can
So-
quickly
so
go through that.
The first thing you'll see in the comprehensive plan is the assumptions
Yep.
that were made. The next is the goals and objectives that we have in the comprehensive plan. The next, we tackle specific items: transportation and mobility, community character, preservation of open space, and open space, I can't read my writing. And preservation of open space and parks, thank you. Environmental resources and infrastructure, governance and public services, land use, and growth management. And in each chapter, there's a discussion about the history of the township, how we got to where we are, and what we think the future should look like.
Okay.
And with that, I yield the floor.
So in terms of your committee or your commission, and anybody can chime in on this, were there any areas, you mentioned there's some finishing, polishing you might want to do tomorrow night. Are there any particular areas where you had trouble building consensus, or where there were competing, I just would like to get a sense of, hey, we were really struggling, when I served on the planning commission with you years ago, we would struggle sometimes with density issues on stuff, and I know that's not specific to the comprehensive plan exactly, but if there were areas like that, it would be great to sort of understand maybe where you had some bottlenecks, or if you still have any bottlenecks, or if you sort of have largely built a consensus amongst your group.
I would say there was more of that in the bigger group
Okay.
than in the planning commission, but there was a lot of opinions expressed. I think right now, Bob has some. I'll name people. Bob has, I know, outstanding items.
Okay.
Michelle has some outstanding items, but I think Michelle's items have been dealt with or may have been dealt with, and the rest of us have expressed opinions, but there's nothing. And there hasn't really been any item. I think one of the with the bigger committee, one of the issues was, and it was brought up by Steve, I believe, about the fair share, is where you have to compromise places. You can't just say we don't want growth, that's it. We want
Right.
farms, that's it. That you can't do that. You got to plan for everything, and once that came through and where we make these compromises, I think it's pretty evident where that happened.
Okay. That's fair enough. Does anyone have any specific questions for Tony? And then if anybody else on the group wants to share thoughts,
I would love for them to share thoughts. 'Cause I don't want it to just be me.
I think Steve raised a really good point, because I was on the task force, and it's more of a question, is that something that you think should have been discussed or should have been reviewed? What's your thought on that?
What I understand from other municipalities, it's something they're discussing because it's coming down. And I was just wondering, working with the county planner, was any of that brought to the table? Was that something discussed as we move forward with this plan?
Was that more from the state level or more from?
I heard it was from state and county, but I think Brian said it's more of a state issue. I think it even comes down from the federal government having certain mandates. We dealt with a little bit before with, we try to be proactive in some rezoning. Because
Right.
we had heard the drums beating in a certain area, but apparently it's gotten broader now. It's growing.
Right, and that was more of a specific zoning change that we made in terms of that. So to your point, Tony and Lee, it sort of comes on, we want to be conscious of that. Like, we don't want the document to necessarily get into the weeds on that, but to Steve's point, there's some sort of, it exists, it's lurking around a corner, and then all of a sudden, we want to make sure that, this is a living document, and we want to kind of make sure that we're doing our best efforts to kind of get the things in there that should be, and make sure that we're at least having discussion on those matters so that we try not to get blindsided. I don't know that you could have gotten into some of the granularity there, but it's.
I would say, things like sewer planning, that's a mandate from the state. There's a sewer act. So we touched upon that kind of things, how are we going to plan for our future growth with, sanitary sewer,
Yep.
and stormwater, and that, yes, that does touch upon what the state's telling us we have to do. So in essence, we do talk, but I don't think anything like you have to have, well, fair share we touched upon, we do have to have that, but so in that context, yes, we did talk about that.
Follow-up question to that, based on your comment, Tony. I think when Rick and I have been to the meetings in Hershey, you learned a lot from talking to different municipalities. And I think it was last year, the year before, there was a presentation on septic cleaning or septic certification companies. I'm not sure if you're there, Rick. And
Right.
apparently once again, this is people from all across the state of Pennsylvania being there, that the state was really frowning on septic systems. They're really pushing, which Worcester has.
It's true.
A lot of these farms and outer areas, the original developments, aren't on sewer, and that's a concern. And
Right.
I'm not sure if Tommy was there, or somebody else was there. And the sewer's a big issue because the state doesn't like these small package plants.
That's right.
There's problems with them. And, once again, I guess you follow the money sometimes, and who's pushing the programs and who benefits from it, who's involved with it.
So there's a whole chapter on that, and it's infrastructure, environmental resources and infrastructure.
Right.
Where that is all addressed, and I can't remember if we exactly state what, who's on septic and where we do
Right.
have public sewer, but let me, Brian, could you address that?
Well, we identified that in certain more in the village areas, as a for instance, that would obviously be a place where public sewer is desirable. We didn't have a specific opinion about overall, should people be on septic or public. We did identify one possible recommendation, which is in the plan, regarding creating a plan for failing systems in the township, which as I'm aware of, that is an issue, and so we didn't outline the parameters of any program. It was sort of indicating the desire to address it. The specifics were not a part of the purview of the plan, but so in that single sense that we do address and identify that identifying failing systems is a priority.
One of the issues from the previous comprehensive plan was over in Hickory Hill development, where
Yep.
the wall lot used to be down there in the corner. And the original comprehensive plan from around 2000, I believe, stated that there was a problem with those homes up there. And maybe the township ignored the comprehensive plan for a number of years. Then finally, the systems were failing, we had to do something. And there was a problem with the neighbors who went and put $30,000 to $50,000 systems in, and now the township is coming in saying, hey, you gotta spend another $40,000 hooking up to our new sewer line going in, which created a problem here probably for 2.5 to 3 years of the meetings, and it was
Right.
a mess. And once again, if you spent the $40,000 because the township told them we weren't gonna sewer certain areas, and the comprehensive plan said it should have been done, who was at fault? We're not sure. But
Right.
going forward, the outlying area of Worcester is a problem. I mean, and these roads, where the developments are, and there's no sewer, we're lucky that most of our lots are 2 acres. Some don't perk, which we've had people coming in,
Right.
need a pump on a weekly basis, and it gets quite expensive.
Yeah.
So these are some of the issues that, coming from the state,
Sure.
coming from the state meetings that we attend, the sewer is a big issue. It's an ongoing issue, and you certainly
Right.
are well aware of that.
Yeah, that was something that we brought up at our meeting between Bob and I, and then I'll let Bob speak. But basically, and I did talk to Joe about this to kind of clarify, but that between Valley Green and Berwick Place, where these developments will go, especially Berwick Place, with these anticipated 320 units between a couple of development areas, then they start kind of maxing out at the capacity. So that was something that we brought up at our meeting, like, you know, what impact is this going to be to the residents on this system already? You know, what's it going to do? Are they going to have to pay more, or,
Right.
you know, what? So that was a question that Bob and I had that I had put in my write-up. But, I mean, probably one of the bigger questions that we had, really, because I know that some of the Hickory Hill people have had in the past, you know, issues with it. Like Steve was just saying, for 3 years they were coming out, it was a great cost to them. Some of the neighbors had more noise, and so in talking to Joe, he said, well, you know, these developers, they would, you know, more than likely be responsible then for the connectors, which is another piece to add on to the sewer system. Learned a lot about the sewer system. I probably don't need to know that much. But, you know, what does that mean to the other neighbors already there as well, right? So I don't totally know. I mean,
Okay.
but, you know, obviously, you're not going to put larger developments in the middle of the county where there's, you know, you're not going to put a sewer plant in the middle of, like, you know, a huge farm area, right? You're going to build on the outsides of the town where these 2 sewer facilities are, so.
Michelle, I agree with you. I'll go back to Jim Garrity, your old solicitor. He said at one of the meetings one time that Worcester kept development out, didn't allow water, didn't allow sewer, and it's going to come back to haunt Worcester in the future. I'll go back to Rick and I sitting with some people from southern Chester County, a very rural area like Worcester, and we were saying, well, we don't have sewer and water. This is great. You may not have it, but the court's going to tell you, you got to have it. And
Right.
that's what we have done in the past. We said, well, we don't have sewer, we can't handle it. Well, in southern Chester County, in the Oxford area, remember, Oxford and Lower Oxford,
Right.
really rural areas. Developer come in, wanted to do something, and we don't sewer, you can't do it. Well, township lost, all the developments are coming in, they forced to put the sewer. So we try to do the right thing here. We try to live with a living document, but it's not fair when the outside sources come and
Right.
dictate us. You know, Worcester's always been in this bubble here that we've done what we wanted to do, made the zoning laws to fit what we wanted to do, but we have the outside sources now pressuring the township to do something. And your law, you know that. So,
Absolutely, and that's why I think we're going through this process so that, you know, we strengthen those things and we be proactive.
Right.
But ultimately, again, this comes down to the supervisors and you making the ordinances requiring this stuff. We identify it, here's what you can do, but it's up to you and whether or not you feel that that's what the community should be doing. So, you know, we give you something, but it's ultimately, it's all passed on to you.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. Bob, we're going to send it down your way. And Jennifer, if you want to share any thoughts, by all means. Okay. Right. Fair enough. Okay.
Moving on. There. The majority of the discussion we had was to review the comprehensive plan as it was presented to us. So from a planning standpoint, the majority of the members on the planning commission were not part of that comprehensive plan. Task force. We could have participated if we wanted, but we weren't one of those members. So we were looking at their work product, critiquing, questioning things that they may or may not have included. But overall, we weren't adding anything else unless there was an omission that we thought should have been
Okay.
have included. Speaking specifically on the sewers, though, I have been a long-standing proponent of more sewers, public sewers, just from a life and health safety standpoint. But we're not looking at, and we're not tasked with looking at the comprehensive plan in terms of how the installation of sewers, and we did have these discussions, the installation of sewers is not going to necessarily encourage, promote, or prohibit any particular development based on that. They're two independent activities, albeit there's a select group that believes if the sewers go in, that will lead to massive development. So we were having discussions about the ordinances that exist and how they would protect from certain types of development as opposed to any element of the particular comprehensive plan. So
Okay.
those are the things that but we weren't really tasked with. We were just reviewing and kind of critiquing what Brian's group had, and when I say
pulled
Brian's
together.
group, he was the chair for that, and I think he generally did a substantial job in terms of wrangling those cats.
Right, and I can say that when Steve and I, in January of, I guess it would have been 2020, maybe even 2019, I lose track, but when we picked the comprehensive plan task force, there was, and if anyone was at that meeting, it was a very spirited meeting, and there was a lot of discussion, and we eventually decided on more versus less in terms of inclusion, and tried to get as good a cross-section as we could, understanding at the end of the day, you know, one of the things that I find with documents like these is you can edit them to the moon. You know, I mean, we could give it back to you, and a year from now, we could be still editing the document, you know, because we're not quite there in one way or the other, and at some point, you know, it's just got to come out of the oven, and we got to move forward in some degree. So I appreciate that, you know, ultimately you guys were not saying, hey, here are your 27 mandates on this. It was starting with an existing product and sort of saying, hey, how do we, you know, do we think there's a glaring omission? Do we think there's some specific areas that we can add some value there? So that certainly makes good sense. Any questions or thoughts from either of you? I've got a couple more comments, and then I think we can.
Are they going to make a presentation, or are we going to just kind of do what we're doing now? That's a lot of questions.
We're just asking questions. There really isn't a presentation for them. What they're going to do tomorrow night is, I know they've got one more, they've got a planning commission meeting tomorrow night with the intent would be that they would vote to give us the document, you know, pass it along or not. Right.
Oh, if I could add, it just occurred to me, there was one more state-based discussion that we had with concerning, you know, potential state involvement in and police forces going down the pike. We did talk about that. I remember Lee, and I, talked about that as well. Obviously, we didn't assume anything in that regard about what the state will do or not do about, the per capita tax or whatever had been proposed over the last number of years for communities using state police. And so we talked about those things theoretically. We mentioned the idea of police forces generally, discussing what those options are, but made no recommendations about, anything like that. But so that's just one more example of a mandate that was discussed, although it's not actually a mandate as of yet.
Thank you there, Brian. I guess I'm sort of running out of time, Rick, but I think that you and Tony both expressed the same thing, that this is a living document, and I think we have to treat it as that. And I think I personally like to thank the Planning Commission as well as the Comprehensive Task Force being that. I think it's a good document. It's a starting point for we, the supervisors, to take an advisement, to tweak and things like that. So for all those involved, I thank you. I think they brought a good document to start with and to work with and to try to make some decisions with the information they presented, with the information we're getting from other outside sources to try to move forward. My biggest problem is that, not big problem, that Worcester, we're the last donut, I guess.
Right.
If you start in Philadelphia, you work your way west.
We're the hole in the donut.
We're the hole in the donut, and we're there. We're treading water, and everyone knows it. They circled around Worcester before. They went past us. Now they're coming back, and I think because the court system, somewhat things have changed. The laws have changed. They interpret them a little bit differently than they had in the past. So that's what we're trying to sit here trying to figure out. We're playing a game of chess, and it's our move. So once again, I thank you. I'm willing to accept the report as is, Rick, and work with it. And for all the time and effort you put into it, thank you very much.
Let me just say that we're going to be making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors take this document and do whatever they want with it. You want to change it, you want to start again, whatever you want. But our goal, and I think that was one of the remarkable things ultimately about this, was that everybody seems to be rowing in the same direction. What do we like about Worcester? Why are we living here? And how
Right.
how best to maintain that? And I think that we all kind of look at this in the same way, so that we're hoping that what you receive is something that you can work with to make your job, whatever you perceive it to be, easier.
Yeah, and I think, look, I should have thanked everybody at the start, ultimately, but it was a lot of work for the task force, particularly doing through the pandemic and Zoom meetings, and the mechanism that took place was excellent. That you guys, we understand the limitations when it gets handed to you, in terms of saying, how do we solve some of these problems? But, yeah, I mean, when we picked the group, ultimately, we knew there were differing opinions. We knew that there were different groups that were being represented, and certainly that was part of the intention, so that what came back was hopefully representative. When we sent the surveys out, we actually sent them out in a very specific and deliberate way so that we would get responses back that we thought were as clean as you can. I mean, again, the data is the data, but one of the things we tried to do, and I know that did get added to the document. I know there were some questions about the survey and should we include that or not in some of those discussions, but certainly we're trying to do that ultimately, and it's just one more piece in terms of that. So certainly we very much appreciate that effort. We hope that you can, if there's any questions to this board, hopefully we've given you proper direction along the way, and you're at least at a point where you say, okay, we're comfortable with where we can pass it back as long as you recognize sort of how it's coming back. And Lou, I don't know if you had some specific questions. I'm sorry you were.
No, I appreciate all the work the board's been doing. It seems like we have the majority in this room seems to have the preservation of Worcester. Because we all live here and we all just want to keep it. We would love to keep it the way it is, and then you make your recommendations. And it seems like the sewer is the biggest thing, and that's your tool to maybe slow growth down. Stormwater's a biggie. So you got to address all these things. So you're right. And then as this is being presented, then do
Right.
you pick and choose what you want to play with, or you can't. It's a plan, so it's a guide. So with your input, then you make hopefully the best decisions we can. Leave as much green as possible.
Well said. So we're going to then wrap up this portion of the presentation, guys. You're certainly welcome to stick around for our business meeting. It's riveting, so feel free to stick around for that. We do have some exciting news that we're sharing in our business meeting if anyone wants to stick around in terms of that. But again, appreciate you guys coming, appreciate everything that you have done. We look forward to you getting us sort of your finished copy so we can take it from there. And we will move forward. Brian, thank you as well. We certainly appreciate all your effort and input on this process. And back to our agenda. Does anybody have any other business for us for our work session? Okay, seeing none. Then we do have a public comment period. If anybody has any specific public comment they want to make relative to the work session, otherwise we can certainly defer those to our business meeting. Does anybody? Kim? I'm taking public comment on this meeting, and certainly the plan would be was the topic of the meeting. So certainly you're welcome to come up and share your public comments on that. Yeah, you could just sort of sit where the mic is, if you will. Can you make sure that the green light is on there for you?
There we go.
There you go.
No, this is probably for Brian. And just wondered if you took into account any regional planning when you worked on this plan, you know, that we could do, share some zoning requirements. I'm sure you're familiar with that with other townships, you know, alleviate some of our high-density concerns, sort of what Steve was bringing up with the housing in the future, and, you know, help us meet the goals of the comprehensive plan.
So, I guess to answer that, we did talk about that, regional planning generally. That is a recommendation in the plan to explore regional planning generally, you know, whether it takes the form of joint zoning or if it takes the form of a joint comprehensive plan. There's different shades of what regional planning can look like, and we essentially said that the township should explore those options. And not just limit it to land use planning, but also to look at other types of planning like stormwater, regional stormwater planning, watershed planning, transportation planning, those types of things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I think Kim said that cherry picking, we had a meeting somewhere, we discussed that about going with a joint plan with other municipalities. And I thought the subject came up that be careful what you wish for, because when you can't really cherry pick certain things. If you're in for everything that they do, and they can force their regulations, other regulations you may not want on you if you're in that. You just can't pick certain things to be involved in. Is that true?
Not necessarily. So
Okay.
it's always by consent ultimately. So when our 4 regional planning organizations in the western part of the county formed, they all formed with what's called an intergovernmental agreement. So they all agreed on the outset that they wanted to do a plan. They created a plan, and then sort of at the end, they decided, they hashed out essentially what uses would be shared and which wouldn't be. Some municipalities, especially like if you take the Pottstown region as an example, you know, Pottstown obviously is a dense place, and a lot of the outerlying municipalities like New Hanover, you know, the relationship allowed them to, you know, withdraw a couple of their uses and then put them in Pottstown in the zoning ordinances. That is, and Pottstown similarly doesn't need to have junkyards as a use because New Hanover has that. So it's a give and take, and you know, if at the last minute the municipality decides not to engage in that, then they can withdraw. But overall, it's always, you decide those things in the very beginning before you actually enter the agreement. So yeah, so in that sense, there's no sort of forcing. That is different than a joint zoning ordinance. That is something that happens in like the Upper Bucks County and the much more rural places, I should say, where resources are not as dense, I should say. So in Montgomery County, the type of regional planning that happens is a joint comprehensive plan, which allows the sharing of uses, but at the outset, it's agreed to at the beginning. of the agreement process.
Thank you, Brian. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board on our work session? Seeing none, motion to adjourn.